Breaking news. Nikon bought Red Cinema Camera Company. Is Nikon going to crush Sony and Canon, or is the weight of an international acquisition going to drag them down? There's a lot to unpack. First, I want to explain who makes this possible. Squarespace, that's our sponsor. Squarespace makes amazing websites. Think of it like a movie poster. Movie posters are carefully crafted to draw the attention of people who'd want to see that movie. They have the right characters, the right fonts, the right colors. Squarespace is the movie poster for your business, your portfolio, your video reel, your personal project, whatever it is you want it to look your best, right? Social media doesn't do that because they don't actually care about you. They care about making money for them. Squarespace, it's a service you pay for and you get what you pay for, which is amazing 24/7 customer support, fantastic designers creating many different templates that you can choose from and maintaining them to make sure that they work on every latest version of iOS that gets released. That's what Squarespace is. Start today at squarespace.com/Tony. When you love it, the coupon code Tony gets you 10% off. Thanks for sponsoring us, Squarespace. Now strap yourself in. You might be asking, who is this guy to be telling us about a merger and acquisition? Sure, he's an incredibly handsome professional photographer, but what does he know about this? Well, in my previous life, I was a director of marketing and strategy at a Fortune 100 tech company, and we went through several different mergers and acquisitions, and I played different roles on those teams. So I have seen it up close, and I've also been following the photographic industry closely for more than 25 years now. Like, I personally met the chief executive officers of all the major camera companies. That's not to say I'm the foremost expert on this particular topic, but I'm probably the best expert you have. First, let's explain who Nikon is if you're not familiar. Nikon is primarily known as a camera company, though they do other things. They were founded in 1917 in Tokyo, where their headquarters still are. And if you want to know the full Nikon history, we have an entire podcast that goes into deep detail. But to put this in context, Nikon had been around for like more than 25 years before World War II. Now, who is Red? Well, Red is much, much younger than Nikon. They were founded in 2005 by the dude who founded Oakley. They're located outside LA and they primarily serve that Hollywood audience, making very specialized, very expensive cinema cameras that happen to mostly take Canon RF lenses, though you could mount other things with adapters. You have certainly seen things that were filmed with Red cameras, like the Squid Games, like Griselda, like Queen's Gambit, and they have actually won an Academy Award. Also, some YouTubers use Red cameras like Marquez Brownlee and Linus Tech Tips. Now, before we go into the next section, I need to kind of break out different levels of video cameras because not everybody seems to understand this. So I'm going to divide video cameras into 4 separate categories. And let's start at the bottom here with the consumer camera. Nowadays, the consumer camera is almost universally a smartphone. Now, 10 years ago, 50 years ago, Canon and Nikon were the leaders in these consumer cameras, but companies like Apple, Google, Samsung have completely dominated the market. And now if you want to take some video of your family or your vacation, this is the camera that you're reaching for. Consumer cameras are defined primarily by convenience and cost. People like to film, edit, and share all from a single device. There's also a whole category of creators, and this is where I am right now. At least, I'm making video for other people to consume. I don't have solid numbers for this, but in my estimation, most creators are still using some kind of smartphone. But many more serious creators are using things like the DJI Pocket 3 or cameras from Sony and Canon. Creator cameras tend to offer better video and sound quality while still allowing a single person to film themselves and see themselves on camera. That's why flippy screens kind of define this segment. They absolutely have to have rock-solid autofocus, which has turned out to be one of the biggest distinguishing factors between different creator cameras. Most people using a creator camera will edit the footage on a separate device, but people who do film on a smartphone often also edit and share directly from that smartphone. Now, there's a level of complexity above the creator here, and this is what I'm calling the videographer. These are people who photograph weddings, where they go to a company's headquarters and do a walkthrough, or they're making those cool videos you see on Zillow when you're checking out real estate. These are people who are not the on-camera talent. They're filming somebody else, something else. They're using the cameras for day-to-day work. Cameras for Videographers tend to be more expensive because there aren't as many of them, but also they're making money, and thus they tend to have a little bit of a budget. Videographers, they're not generally on camera at the same time, and often they have somebody else directing them, so they're focused just on filming. If, for example, you film a wedding and you lose your footage, you can't go back and refilm it. Thus, these cameras tend to have 2 memory card slots, some sort of redundancy. They also need to be extremely dependable and serviceable, meaning they don't break often, and if they do break, you can get a loaner quickly and you can get it replaced quickly. They also need a lot of flexibility. They'll often have attachment points so you can add handles and microphones, or you might attach them to a gimbal because they need to be used in a lot of different situations, such as static or moving shots. Unlike creators, videographers often care about the frames per second. Like they want to shoot at 24 frames per second, which is a little odd with a 180-degree shutter, meaning that their shutter speed is twice the frame rate, and to accommodate that, many cameras designed for this segment have built-in ND filters that block a certain amount of light. They might also have lenses that support power zooms, allowing the videographer to push in or pull out, just adding another tool to their arsenal. Cameras for cinematographers aren't necessarily producing better video quality, at least that's not their primary purpose. The form factor provides a lot more flexibility for the ways that movies and TV shows are actually made. Well, I am on camera, but also the camera operator, and videographers are the camera operator, but they're not on camera. In a cinema world, the person operating the camera isn't even the only person working that camera. There's often a separate focus puller whose job it is just to manually focus it and make sure everything is locked in. And there'll often be somebody monitoring the camera separately with a separate screen. To accommodate these use cases, cameras in this segment need to have multiple different ways to control it and view it. They need to have a lot of interchangeable parts, like you need to be able to slap on a V-mount battery so that you can continue to shoot all day. Footage out of these cameras might look worse than it would even out of your smartphone because they are designed to be graded. There'll be professional colorists who go in and adjust the footage in post, and those colorists tend to be very picky about the different file formats and codecs that they like to work with. They also want as much grading latitude as possible, thus cinema cameras tend to focus on the maximum amount of dynamic range that can be captured. Many films and TV shows are created in virtual environments, assuming that there's going to be a great deal of special effects in post. Cinema cameras, like the Red cameras, have features specifically to support these environments. They'll often be very high resolution, like 8K, because they might be projected in big movie theaters, whereas this is never going to be viewed in a movie theater, and 4K is more than enough. If you check out the prices for this gear, at each level they go up drastically. While you can get a decent smartphone for a couple of $100, cinema camera can easily run you $25,000 once it's fully outfit, and you could definitely spend $100K on a single camera once you have the attachments and monitors and focus pulling devices that you need to actually shoot with it. At the same time, there's a lot more interest in the consumer stuff because the volume is much higher with the lower end devices that you and I are going to use. Well, there are hundreds of millions of people who want to use a consumer video camera, and probably only tens of thousands of people who might ever use a cinema camera. Let's take a look at how the different camera manufacturers serve this segment, starting with the camera manufacturers that we're most familiar with. I'm primarily focused on video in this segment, so I'm talking about some of the biggest names, but not all of the big names. Canon is really huge in this segment. Not only do so many creators like myself use them for what we're doing with my Canon R3, but they have a whole line of cinema cameras that primarily serve serious videographers, but they don't so much go into the cinema lineup. Their cameras don't offer the features we just listed as sort of being important for that particular segment. Sony covers the consumer and creator segments, of course, but they have some more serious cinema cameras, really serious cinema cameras, and they have won numerous different Academy Awards for that. Panasonic, not that popular with creators and YouTubers right now. In my opinion, the autofocus just isn't good enough for that, but the more serious environments where people are manually focusing or you have focus pullers, Panasonic does fantastic. They have a lot of equipment for the high end of this, including proper cinema cameras that compete with companies like ARRI and Red. DJI is a recent entrant in this segment with things like the Ronin 4D and the Pocket 3, and they're on the chart, but there's still a big gap in the middle for more serious creator work like this. And that brings us to Nikon, which has a pretty small slice of this. Yes, Nikon makes cameras that consumers, creators, videographers can use, but at the same time, they're not the most popular. In my opinion, even the latest cameras like the Z8 and Z9 here lack the autofocus abilities for me to really trust it. And cameras like this have 8K 60. It has the features, but it does not have the form factor, like the ability to attach multiple different microphones and a rig easily to it, like proper cameras designed for videographers and cinematographers would. Therefore, they're sort of missing that entire segment. Enter Red. Red only makes cinema cameras. They do not have any cameras for creators, though some creators do use them. But they are very well known in that cinema segment, having things like bigger than full frame 8K global shutter technology. And so it's pretty exciting to think that we might be able to combine those last two things. But I want to talk about how Nikon got here and why they're kind of falling behind. In the 2010s, we saw the market for stills photography pretty rapidly shift towards video. This is the time period when everybody's bandwidth at home was going up, when smartphones got the computing power to just display video casually. Suddenly video was more accessible to everybody. Canon definitely saw this. Like, I remember picking up that Canon 70D from 2013, and their dual pixel autofocus absolutely blew me away. And we immediately stopped manually focusing and started using that. And I'm still using Canon cameras today. They had a huge head start. With their insight, they're planning ahead to shift into this on-sensor focusing world. At the time, Nikon was really focused on DSLRs, and their DSLR focusing system was excellent, but it was not at all transferable to mirrorless cameras or to video. And they really didn't start developing anything for video focusing until about 2018. Sony definitely was behind, but with the launch of the A7S III, they immediately caught up with that on-sensor mirrorless video autofocusing to the point where I exchange between the Sony A7S III and various Canon cameras just interchangeably because they're both essentially perfect. But Nikon, to this day, still doesn't have a camera that I would recommend. So in this way, they are behind and playing catch up, and this Red acquisition can really help them. Now, the people at Nikon, they now know that they should have been focused on video and that they need to get there as fast as possible. And the fact is, a lot of tech companies can be behind and then suddenly catch up. It's much easier to catch up when you are behind than it is to innovate and be the first there. But they were faced with the question, should we build it or buy it? And by build it, I mean develop the technologies internally, build up the brands to take over the higher end of the video segment, or should they just look for somebody to acquire? Let's take a quick peek at Nikon's finances to see if they even had any money to buy somebody. And it turns out Nikon is really profitable. Looking just at the imaging division, if I do a little extrapolation, I think this fiscal year they'll probably profit about $389 million. Now, there are other divisions that actually lose money, so the entire company's profit is less than this. But you can see they're pushing around quite a bit of money, and they're currently sitting on about $1.25 billion converted to US dollars in cash that they could theoretically spend to buy something. That's a lot of money. That is almost the net worth of Kim Kardashian. Now, what about Red? Red only has 220 employees. They're a small company. And in fact, Nikon's been fighting with them in court. They were suing each other over various patents that their cameras are using. And when you go through that process, you have to look at the other company's financials and thus what their damages might be. And I feel like when they were doing this, they were looking at each other's numbers being like, hey, we don't really overlap. We might complement each other. I think we might be able to do something interesting here. The fact is, Red adds a lot of value. They have a great lineup of cameras that in no way overlap with Nikon, but do overlap with Nikon's competitors like Panasonic, Canon, and Sony. They also have multiple global shutters that they can readily produce. And we just saw Sony launch the A9 Mark III with its global shutter and huge amounts of fanfare. Right now, Nikon buys their sensors from Sony. Would you want all your future products to depend on your biggest competitor? No. In the cinema world, people love Red. They have a lot of name recognition, but camera operators also know how to use them. They are familiar with them, and that is a huge deal because it can be difficult to switch from one system to another, and operators have big preferences. They don't freely switch between different camera brands. Red has deep connections with a lot of Hollywood, and they have made a point of putting their cameras in the hands of a lot of students. So they're going to be even more well-known in the future as these film students sort of graduate up into the real world. They're going to have an automatic preference for the camera that they learned. But perhaps Red's most valuable thing is the large number of patents that they own. Nikon has previously been infringing upon these patents, at least that's what Red alleged in court. And by owning them, not only are they not infringing upon them anymore, but they could potentially create new products around them. So as of a couple of days ago with the acquisition, this is now what the chart looks like. Nikon now has a much bigger horizontal within this segment. They have a lot more power, but at the same time, more competition. But notice there's still a bit of a gap here. So now that Nikon owns Red, how are they going to go about filling that gap? I think this is actually going to be a really big challenge. Like my first instinct was, well, just take the guts of the Nikon Z9 and put it into a Red body. But the challenge is that those have completely different internals. They both have proprietary hardware and software systems. So Nikon's going to be forced to pick one or the other, or they try to take their Z9 software and make it aesthetically look like the Red software so that they won't lose that familiarity that those film students all have from working with their many Red cameras. How do you transition from lower end Z cameras aimed at creators and videographers to the higher end cinema cameras and make that sort of seamless? I am not sure. I think that's going to be a big thing to tackle. You also have not a small challenge of transitioning the lens mount, because right now Red cameras use the Canon RF mount. They have a close partnership with Canon that is definitely going to end. I'm sure Canon's not going to want to continue working with them and vice versa. But at the same time, all the cinematographers who are working with the gear, they have a set of lenses that they probably use, and they're probably Canon RF. Also, Nikon doesn't currently make any Z-mount cinema lenses, so we'll start to see some development in those areas. There is a lot of work to be done, and I personally am not sure that this is the right direction for Nikon. I think I might have steered Nikon to go more for volume and lower price points than the high end of the market, which already seems pretty well served by some really entrenched parties. The path they're taking seems difficult, though I don't claim to fully understand it. I'm seeing a lot of people online celebrating prematurely. They're like, suck it, Sony, Nikon just crushed everybody. Now Nikon owns you because they got Red. But it's really not that simple. They got a difficult path ahead of them. You know what it's like to me? It's like your best friend just said, hey, guess what? I just bought a Ferrari. I'd be like, you're the man. This is going to be awesome. Let's go for a drive. And then you see the car and it looks like this and you realize, oh man, at best, this is going to be a lot of work. At worst, this is going to ruin our lives. And I think that's entirely possible because mergers and acquisitions are a pain in the ass. Here's a quote from the Harvard Business Review. According to most studies, between 70 and 90% of acquisitions fail. Most explanations for this depressing number emphasize problems with integrating the two parties involved. There's going to be some real problems integrating a very young Hollywood company with a very old Japanese company. I cannot even imagine how that's going to go about. The simplest thing would be to just keep them entirely separate. But if they do that, then where is the benefit? How do you combine their culture, their strategy, their marketing, their HR, their IT, their accounting, all of these different systems without dragging them both down? If you love Red today, it is entirely possible that Nikon will make a misstep and ruin it. They could decide to put their Nikon software in there and suddenly it doesn't work quite as well. Or maybe the Nikon lenses that they require you to use don't work quite as well as the Canons. I don't know what path Nikon is going to take here, but it is covered in potholes. There are so many different things that could go wrong. Nonetheless, acquiring Red really leaps Nikon forward in this segment. It does give them a huge step up. But let's be clear, Nikon did it because they're behind and they're trying to catch up, and now they're still trying to catch up. They still have a ton of work to do. Let's take a look at the lineup of their lead competitor, which is Sony. Sony has smartphones covering the consumer end of the market. Lots of creator cameras like the ZV cameras. They have videographer cameras like the FX cameras. They also have full cinema cameras that you can spend $50,000, $60,000 on before they outfit them. Sony has flying cameras. They have literal professional grade drones, as well as professional and enthusiast amateur equipment, shotgun mics, lab mics from big to small. Adding Red only covers part of that cinema camera segment, and both Red and Sony cinema cameras have scientific and technical Academy Awards. But Sony has one other thing, and that's Sony Pictures. Sony Pictures is huge. They have 12 Best Picture Oscars. Not just Oscars, but 12 Best Picture Oscars. They produce so much, not to mention Sony Music and all the music videos that they produce. Sony is huge. Somehow they have managed to cross all the cultural boundaries. But that is not simple, and it has taken them a long time. And Nikon buying one company does not make those two companies equivalent. They have a lot of work to do. I already know what a lot of the comments are going to be. Why do you hate Nikon? You're just always crapping on Nikon, because so much of what we consume today is driven by hidden agendas and sponsored things and feelings. But as a reminder, I've never accepted money or free gear from any camera or lens manufacturer. I'm just trying to bring you the news as best as I can digest it. I neither love nor hate Nikon. They are a corporation. When Nikon made the D850, we called it the greatest DSLR ever made, and both Chelsea and I switched to it as our main photography cameras. When Nikon first launched the Z mount in 2018, 2019, it was a misstep. They flopped, and we called them out for that, and we switched away from Nikon. Now with the Z8 and Z9, they won our 2023 Camera of the Year awards, and I don't use them for everything, but I use them for a lot. They're damn good. I'm not a Nikon fanboy. I'm not a Sony or Canon fanboy. I'm a photography fanboy. I'm a video fanboy. I love the art and the science, and I love the competition because business is my sport. So my neighbor sees me, he's like, "Did you see the game last night?" No, because last night I spent the whole night researching Nikon's financials and Red's position in the market and studying all of this because I get excited about this. Nikon buying Red is like when the Tampa Bay Buccaneers picked up Tom Brady. It's like, I don't know if that's a good choice, but I'm here for it. I'm excited to see it. So in the comments, tell me how you think this is going to go. Was it a good choice for Nikon? Can they hope to compete? Is this a huge win that puts them in the same market with Canon, Sony, Panasonic? Or is the challenge of trying to acquire a foreign company going to be too great and drag them both down? Maybe they'll just leave Red alone and just use some of their patents. I don't know. Tell me your thoughts in the comments and we'll come to it together. And don't forget to check out our sponsor, Squarespace. Squarespace makes incredible websites so easy. Literally just try it out for free. Go to squarespace.com/Tony. They're not going to try to get your credit card or anything. Build a website that looks beautiful. Put your pictures, put your video reel in there, tell your own story. Design a website, get a domain name just for you. So you're not going to be gmail.com anymore. It's going to be northrupphotography.com or whatever your brand is, because that's what Squarespace does. They support you. Try it out for free from squarespace.com/Tony. When you love it, use my coupon code, Tony, and you'll get 10% off. Thank you, Squarespace, and don't forget to subscribe for more news like this, tutorials, and lots of reviews. Bye.